Thank you. So thank you, and to Juan as well. So I'm Anita Simons. I represent the healthcare professionals, and I'll hand over shortly to Josie, who represents the patients and consumers. Can I have the next slide, please? Just to give you some background, originally this was set up as a COVID task force in around October 2020, and myself and Tiago Villanueva from Waymo were the representatives, and we worked across primary care and respiratory medicine, intensive care, high dependency unit care. And then in around April 2022, the COVID task force morphed into the emergency task force, which we're talking about, with a wider remit. And Tiago stepped down a few months ago. But importantly, the emergency task force then expanded last summer to handle Mpox as well as COVID. And it was very interesting to see the application of the extended remit of EMA to cover the rapid setup of EU trials for antivirals and vaccines in Mpox. And now we have a lot of conversations about influenza. Initially, the meetings of the emergency task force and the COVID task force were 3 times a week, especially at the height of COVID, and now they're usually once or twice a week. And as you heard from Marco, this is the position you can just to orientate yourself, the emergency task force and the overall expert advice and that information feeding down to CHMP. Next slide, please. So what does one do as a healthcare professional representative? Well, the general responsibilities really as being part of the transparency governance processes of EMA, but also giving clinical input. There have been lots of meetings, as you can see, and I think what we're really doing is a two-way interaction, and that is commenting on clinical aspects of trials. We have voting rights for decision making, and also a very key role in dissemination of information outwards as well as inwards to the committee members, providing updates to healthcare professionals. As well as the committee meetings, there are workshops, for example, on vaccine-induced myocarditis or vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura. And another part of our role is to interact with the comms department. So, for example, on the safety reports on vaccines, we were asked to comment on those, on the wording of those very regularly, and also have taken part in campaigns such as for European Vaccine Day on the Catch Up on Vaccines campaign and provided videos with that. I think crucially too, we're there as an advocate on behalf of EMA to combat disinformation and misinformation, which I know we're discussing later in the program, and to help healthcare professionals understand better EMA processes. I think, for example, the rolling reviews, there was not perfect understanding, at least initially. Next, please. This, I think, just gives an example of the flows of information. There's a lot of information coming to Josie and myself as the representatives, and we feed a little back of advice, and we can give that appropriately. We have a responsibility to disseminate, of course, to you, as we're doing today, but on other occasions, and also, of course, to European healthcare workers, and more generally from the comms point of view to patients, public, and press. Next, please. So just to give you a flavour of the discussions before I finish, most of the committee meetings comprise of at least several scientific advices on, for example, trial processes, but also there are updates on, say, COVID variants. Last week, we discussed new vaccine platforms for the potential development of pan-vaccines, pan-COVID vaccines, pan-influenza vaccines. And there's discussion on the composition of vaccines for the autumn-winter COVID campaigns and also seasonal influenza vaccine in children and adults. What I think we can press on as to be involved even more in is updates on outcomes, not just on vaccines, but also antivirals, anti-inflammatories, to understand outcomes in particular patient groups, cardiology patients, respiratory, renal, rheumatology patients. pregnant and lactating individuals, because this is vital information to healthcare professionals and our patients. And gathering that information together, not always contained in the big trials, but from registries, real world data, I think is really important that we disseminate out to our colleagues. And there are workshops due on long COVID, a joint HERA, so the Emergency Responsiveness Agency, on countermeasures for chemical, biological and radiological threats, because the task force is not just involved in micro biological threats, but also all these other important threats. My reflection so far is that it's been hugely informative. It's really interesting to watch decision making in action. I think it's brilliantly chaired, the committee, by Marco Cavalieri, but it's very informative to watch the input from the highly experienced rapporteurs, and also the interaction with different regulatory authorities, which is very reassuring. So the discussions between EMA and FDA, the Canadian regulatory authority, the Swiss one, the Japanese one, MHRA, really seeing how they work together. And with the extended remit, the new links with trial design, academia, I mean, reinforced links with these, and obviously a balanced approach to industry. It has been an extremely steep learning curve. There's lots and lots of acronyms to take on board. And what we continue to work on, and I hope we can do better, is disseminate some of the information on the work that the Emergency Task Force does to our healthcare professional colleagues. And with that, I'll hand over to Josie. Next slide.
Thank you, Anita. Of course, we have a similar input because we are there all the time. But first of all, for quite some time, I have represented the PCWP together with François Huet in the ETF meetings. And earlier on this year, there was a reorganization, and François resigned, and now I'm the only patient representative. And as Anita already said, it has been a very steep learning curve, because the task force deals with issues which are not normally discussed at a patient organization's meeting. And on top of that, many of the topics are very confidential. I feel that my remit is to always approach a discussion with a patient point of view, to highlight the population with special requirements, such as pregnant women, young children, and the immunocompromised patient. There are discussions on the subject of... If I was using I'm sorry, is there something wrong?
Oh, no, I think it was just an interruption. Please, we can hear you very well, Joseph. Continue.
Okay, I'm sorry. There are always discussions ongoing on possible treatment for SARS-2 COVID, flu vaccinations for various age groups. Future developments and agenda items are shared amongst the ETF members, and quite often ad hoc documents need to be commented on quickly. And apart from what Anita said, I find it a huge honor to be part of this very selective group and share the ideas with regulators and with rapporteurs and such incredibly learned people. That has been a fantastic experience. And I hope that the task force has found the input of both patients and healthcare professionals of value. Thank you.